Thank you to the Center for Innovation for hosting this webinar. My name is Josh Cushner. I'm CEO of a new company, DuplexLoop, which provides owners rep services for innovation programs and project definition work. And today in this webinar, I'll be opening up a discussion I hope feels timely because it speaks to the imperative for enterprises to innovate, which I think we're all feeling nowadays. And while construction innovation and in the delivery of construction innovation is driving towards productization, owners are seeking to leverage these efficiencies for very specific and very unique outcomes related to their business. And increasingly to leverage both innovation within their business and innovation in the marketplace, project leaders are needing a structured definition phase, which helps them prioritize the right early decisions that will bring these innovations from a state of being too risky to a state of being ready to deliver. And I hope you enjoy the presentation. Please stick around for the Q&A after. And please type in your questions as we go so we can pick them up at the end. A bit about me. I started my career in New York City as an acoustician, being involved in a little bit in a lot of projects, over 250 over about 6 years, affording me an interesting view on the variety of how projects are set up to be delivered. And that varied from everything from the most methodical project teams to New York City developers who like to pick up drawings and specifications and throw them around the room to get jobs done. So with that experience, I moved on to a firm, Arup, and built a venue design practice. My experience around venue design is relevant here because venues both are highly technically complex, but also you really need to understand how the building's going to be used and how it's going to be used flexibly by people that you'll never even meet and never even know what they're going to do in the future. So how do you create sufficient definition to how this building is going to be used so you design it correctly? Out of that experience, it just so happened that became attractive to all the big tech firms in the Bay Area where I moved to in 2009. And as they started to develop venues of their own, but instead of for performing arts organizations, they were actually for their software engineers and their staff. But still, they had this need for flexibility. They had these groups that changed in size and scale and how they use space. And so I worked for almost 10 years with a lot of these companies on their innovation programs and pushing those innovations into global portfolios over billions of dollars of work. And I learned a lot from them around how they took their development of software and products and thought about that in the development of their projects. Around the same time, I was working as an operational leader at Arup of about 100 people, which was focused on specialisms and helping to grow those businesses. And after the pandemic, I moved back into large project delivery for key clients and large projects, where I came to really recognize something I've known for a long time about this diversity of how projects are set up and delivered, is that you could be at the highest levels of delivering design, and ultimately there are many decisions being made about how these projects are being set up that can affect and impact the success of that project downstream in ways that no designer can actually change. So that gets me to where I am today, and why I'm talking to you today is I've struck out on my own to build this business called DuplexLoop. And I spent some time out of practice, so to speak, working with Scrum Inc. and understanding agile product development and how both software and hardware products are brought to market. So I could start to think about the same exercise and the same process that brings projects to birth to have the same level of readiness as a product does. So that's my background and why I'm so interested and passionate about this subject of getting projects right. There's three aspects here that we're going to sort of anchor around, but ultimately what I'm trying to do today is to help establish a common vocabulary for what is the project definition stage and how owners can start to take a path to experimenting with and starting to use it. So the things to know to start is that we don't really have definition stages today with structure. We usually have a pre-delivery phase, and we'll talk about the difference of how that time gets used. Then we'll talk about what a structured definition stage is, fundamentally how it pulls forward the right early decisions that owners need to increasingly make to leverage innovation and to create value in their projects from that. And then a wonderful byproduct of doing definition work is you're creating this team I'm terming a small room, which plays off the concept of the big room, which the big room is a delivery team that gets to benefit from the knowledge created by this small room. And we'll talk more about that interplay. Now, before diving in, it's always good to zoom out. This is about being proactive about better project delivery. That makes people sometimes concerned because that means this delivery system that we all are trained to work through and to work together would have to change in some way, and that instability creates concern. So why should we be proactive about this? Most people start with these curves from McKinsey. They show a straight line going upper left to lower right, which represents the productivity of the entire construction industry over the last 40 years. I like to use this instead. It's an organization called Independent Project Analysis, and I highly recommend you check out their work. They also put on webinars and publish papers. And this particular one was published earlier this year, and it just states the major challenges that are faced across industries. And it really is about the mode of project delivery forcing onto us these realities that project organizations, they're slow in the front end. As a result, they try to catch up in execution and they can't. That it costs far too much to get things going, and the complexity of it all means that we are losing our governance of how well these things are delivered. And this is not, to repeat this gentleman's words, it's not to scare and shock, but actually to get us together to focus on the reality of what project delivery looks like today. Now, if that's the backdrop of everything we do, why should we specifically be talking about changes to model that leverage project definition? And I'd say even just a few years ago, this type of upfront decision making and kind of being able to leverage innovation, it was not as critical. It was more of a nice to have. It was more of something that companies like Google and Meta get to hire people like me and think and talk and develop interesting strategies. But as the sophistication of technology and AI moves at the pace that it is, the reality is that products are becoming more turnkey. Construction is becoming more like manufacturing. And the decisions that owners need to make to leverage this type of advance requires them to make decisions early, because these are manufacturing processes. So it forces commitments to scope that owners generally would not be making as early in the project phase if it was normal delivery. And why is this? Well, ultimately, there's a number of factors, but you lose your spot in line. And once you start to spend more time deliberating, you actually lose the advantages of a lot of these innovations, which largely come in the form of time savings. So that's the backdrop about why model change is relevant, why project definition is important. And because there's lots of different lenses based on the sectors that you work in our industry, we're going to anchor ourselves around one situation. And I'm going to use this situation to help lead the discussion about project definition. So we're going to imagine that us, we are the design and delivery leader of an imaginary organization called Fable Hospital. And this is a forward-thinking organization where there's recognition that the projects they deliver is actually just a support function of their enterprise. And so investments are made, and sometimes very large ones, if it means that, in this case, care delivery, their business outcomes are improved. Now, I didn't just make this up, and I'm actually pulling from work that other people have done in a similar realm to use this idea of a fable hospital to test the quality of innovation. And so, just want to reference the work that's been done by others from the Center for Health Design and the Pebble Project that started this idea of a fable hospital to test out if we add evidence-based design interventions, it's going to cost more, but it's going to benefit the hospitals at a greater degree. And so the first level was looking at interventions that maybe increase cost by 5%. The second intervention looked at innovations at a higher scale that would cost even more, but then also started to think about process innovation, not just the product that's being delivered, but the process by which it is being delivered. And when they looked at the trends in lean construction and the fact that having experienced people continuing to do each project every time can give them back advantages that they can leverage to pay for the increased capital costs of these design innovations. So this is the state that we're going to pull from here. And we're going to say, okay, this fable hospital, this fable organization at 2.0, it still exists. You were the design leader, and you did the same thing that pretty much all design leaders do. Makes complete sense. You set up a pre-delivery phase that makes you as quickly as possible ready to deliver the next job. And you do this because you have a pipeline, right? You have a whole bunch of healthcare related assets that need to get built, and they get approved by your board. And one by one, they show up in your project management office, your PMO. And the system you've set up, which is stable, it has a full set of design standards, it has a full set of process in play. So you really only need to make one decision. Are you going to pick the same team or a new team? And then you take your up-to-date playbook and you are ready to deliver. The job happens, perhaps there's a lessons learned, perhaps you update the playbook, but you're in a stable state. But this is 2025, and it's not anymore just about evidence-based design interventions that might increase your costs 5 to 8%. The level of competition in the healthcare space for your client is high, and delivery care is changing rapidly. And that means it's changing so much that your facilities do not support that future care. And you need different facilities that look and act differently so that you can deliver this better care at lower cost and compete in this future marketplace. So you have these very specific, very ambitious innovations that the business is driving. And you as a support function ought to be helping them. But the stable system that you've created, that pretty much all PMOs create, are actually not ready to deliver that level of innovation, right? It's not just about the same or new team, and your playbook doesn't create the designs and the projects and outcomes that are required. So you work for a big organization and you recognize what AI can do. And maybe you take a cue from some folks in the strategy field who are telling you there are major changes coming from AI that you can invest in. And if you get things like digital twins going and generative scheduling, digital control towers, you can make this big leap from 2.0 to 3.0. And the idea here is that if you make these huge investments, that you'll be able to get this major change in your operating system, which gets alignment of your entire team to what an owner wants. And you can do that in theory because you have total workflow between your product team and your production team, right? And this simulation model that lets you change and test anything at really no risk. Because on one hand, the model lets you validate and test change, and on the other hand, the same model is constrained to, to help delivery. Now, it sounds great. It will be great in the future, but the reality is that we're not ready for that. And we're not sure when we will be, but our organization does still want to take a big leap and really start to invest in innovation if they can, but it has to be implementable now. So this gets us to an owner-led innovation model, which we're going to talk about for the rest of the time today. So I'll call it 2.1. It's not quite 3.0. And on the right-hand side, we're not changing much. You still have the the lean construction process. You still have your big room. And what we're changing is what happens instead of pre-delivery, it's a full definition phase. And it's driven by these new customer requirements and these new outcomes. And those outcomes start to get intaken, not by the PMO per se, but by something I'll call a small room. And that small room is what drives the project definition process. And ultimately, what they're figuring out is out of all these things that innovation are going to change, what is still standard? There's still going to be medical equipment. There's still going to be compression lines. There's still going to be all kinds of things we're very familiar with. But what's actually unique about this change? And then not just because it's unique, but because it's actually critical to decide now what your solution is going to be so that you can be ready to deliver. And if you work through a backlog of all the things that are unique and critical to decide now, not through design, but through prototyping, you can get down to the point where you're fully ready to deliver again. The idea here is not to create a barrier and a wall between these two teams, but to recognize the definition phase starts first. The delivery phase happens once readiness occurs, but there's a loop and there's connectivity because the small room can't be a bunch of thinkers that just imagine concepts. That's an old version of innovation that you can't operationalize. It has to pull from representatives of that full end-to-end delivery team, and we'll talk more about this. But by having representatives from the full team at the beginning and the small room creating this knowledge, you're able to then pull the small room into the delivery phase to create fast decisions and prioritization because of the amount of knowledge and learning and wisdom that's created in the small room. Okay. So that's the model that's being pitched back to our Fable Hospital board. And they're asking questions, and they're asking the same questions that any owner is going to ask, which is, one, how is this structured project definition stage different than what I already do now? Two, if I already have all these partners and contracts in place, why should I have a separate stage that's owner-led? And three, what actually does this team do? So I'm going to try to walk through these questions. So first, how is structured project definition different than what I already do? And when the owner asks that, what they're really asking is, how is my stable process different than this new process? And in both cases, they're just processes to get you to readiness as fast as possible. But in your stable state, you make an assumption of standardness with very limited variance. And when you're doing full definition, you're assuming high levels of uniqueness. So the work that you have to do before you're ready greatly varies. Now let's look at the first instance where we take our pre-delivery approach, our playbook approach, because most organizations, they don't have internal structures that are great at innovation, that really know innovation cycles, that do it every day. So when you start with a new idea, all these things that Fable Hospital wants to do, it creates actually a business opportunity because there's 1,000 possible ways you could solve these problems through what you build. But in the pre-delivery phase, when we're working on a playbook, when we're trying to get as fast as we can to the delivery phase, we just jump to solutions. It's what the playbook tells us, it's what you expect would be needed, it's what's standard. And when you take a playbook approach, you have both what's standard, but you have unique variances that haven't really been tested. And so what you end up with are complex problems. And a complex problem is, as we'll describe in a minute, is different. Now, complex problems are things that need to be learned, that need to be better understood. And when you're in the delivery phase, you're working against a very rigid process that has been set up to do specific tasks within a specific time with limited contingency. And that contingency is probably enough to work through what I'll call delivery problems. Those are problems around communication, information flow. They cause delays, but they're very solvable going forward. When you have complex, unique problems, you have definition problems. And the delivery team often doesn't know what to do or has to go backwards to rework a solution. And we don't have processes and contingencies that allow for many of these definition problems to be found. And the more that we find them, the more that we experience the very common pain points of all projects, which is you're finding definition and delivery problems all at the same time, and the contingency you need for every single job is greater than expected. Now, the pressure is still there to deliver to the plan that you committed to. So this extra work erodes margins and erodes confidence and erodes team chemistry and erodes the factors that you need to continue to deliver under pressure. Now that's on the delivery side. On the business side, the executives know this happens all the time. They've seen it day in and day out. And they fear when they have a innovative idea that the future definition problems are enough to stop them from saying yes, because they don't trust that even this wide contingency will be enough. And if you are on the innovation side trying to create a new project idea that you think is going to drive value, often you can't create apples to apples comparisons because you don't have a system that actually produces enough definition in your ideas to even compare them. So what is our response? So our response is to replace this pre-delivery phase with a full definition phase. And we start at the same spot with the business opportunity with thousands of possible solutions. But instead of jumping to decide what it is, we set a goal. It's a product that we're delivering mindset. And it's what is the best value product that creates all these business opportunities as best we can. And to do that, we don't enter into full design. We create this small room that prototypes these unique and critical to solve now problems by testing them for quality and fixing the risks that come about. When we do this, we end up with MVPs. If you're familiar with the product process, we'll call these micro viable projects in this case. They're the valid concepts that come out of prototyping that give full visibility into the risk and the solution, right? By doing this, you're taking out all your complex problems and leaving just complicated ones, which are able to be coordinated by professional practice. They're just technical coordination. They're the thing that delivery teams are great at. And when you only leave complicated problems and you have a lean delivery team like Fable Hospital does, you actually have a more adaptive process to begin with, right? And it really shows the handshake between this definition phase and the lean process, where the small room is able to provide fast feedback loops, quick owner decisions, solving the problems that come up and allowing for continuous improvement. So perhaps we convinced then our owners that that project definition phases make sense and they do de-risk better than standard pre-delivery. But they say, we already have partners in place. We already have a system in place. Why do I have to do this under my business practice? So this is a little bit more nuanced. But I'm taking an idea from Charlie Dunn that I saw him present at a Lean conference last year, and it really plays on this idea that you have silos, we have these specializations, we have this fragmentation on our project teams. And you can kind of see each of these specializations, they're really good at doing one thing. They push the boulder up and down their own hill. And they create these handoffs between teams, and these teams, they get good at what they're good at, but they aren't necessarily seeing the forest for the trees. And the impacts of this is manifest, and it's its own webinar to talk about the impacts of fragmentation on the construction industry. But it's safe to say that there are pain points here that make using the third party agreement, using the delivery team to do definition is going to be frustrating, because you have the hierarchical issues and the trust issues that come from commercial agreements of guarantee to deliver. You have the issues that breed a lack of accountability because you only do one thing, not everything. The inherent knowledge transfer problems between everybody. And often the decisions that are made by certain expertise is not seeing the whole picture. And it's impossible to weigh the benefits of these solutions without seeing that whole picture. So what we're looking to do then is not ignore the knowledge end to end. We actually have to capture the knowledge end to end still, but we don't want to capture it under the commercial agreement of the delivery team and everything that that comes with. We want to pull who we need when we need them under a commercial agreement that promotes collaboration and unified solutions that are for the owner's benefit, that aren't thinking about how the contractor or the designer or whomever is going to leverage the project downstream. So creating this single point of accountability that has this benefit of rapidly gaining project specific knowledge in this small room is a proven way to make good decisions early and test them against the whole outcome that you're trying to achieve through delivery. And it's not my idea. And as I'm saying it, many of you will be thinking, well, this sounds familiar. I just make sure I'm plugged in. To folks who know the software product development process, which, as I mentioned, I spent a fair bit of time with Scrum Inc. learning. From folks who work in the strategy space, McKinsey just generally calls this project development, but they follow very similar strategies with their large clients. Or if you're steeped in Toyota quality systems and lean systems, you'll recognize this as an overlapping development phase where you overlap the skills and bring them into development. So it's a proven transferable approach that just hasn't really been embraced in the construction field as much as it could. So we've told our board, here's why project definition is different than pre-delivery. We've explained why it's better to have full alignment under your business practices to do this. So what exactly does a small room do? Well, this is a webinar in itself as well. And I will start by keeping things at high level, and happy to delve into more during the Q&A. But inside the definition stage, ultimately, the small room is trying to define the new project's DNA. And at the beginning, there is really just a project sponsor coming up with their business plan. They've evaluated market risks, and they've decided that this is how the enterprise is going to take forward their version of business innovation. but it's not just a market risk that they're solving for, and their target profile for their project is quite immature at this level. So bring in the small teams, start the definition phase, start the exercise, and you need to start looking at operational risks. So if you're going to do this new approach to care delivery, how is your operation different in the future than it is today? How does the facility need to change to meet your operational needs? And are there actually changes to your operating future model that dovetail better with different design scenarios? Through that process, you're going to migrate from this original profile for your target project to a refined one. And the refinement in this case considers how operations and the facility are going to become one. Once you've looked at your operational risks and you think that you have a future model that matches the facility bones that you've created, you've probably generated technical risks. These are things that you've never done before, spaces you've never designed before, places that have never been used, technologies that you don't know. Or it could be very specific things about the site or the conditions that again force you to do things that you've never actually done. So when you start testing future scenarios of how you're going to solve these technical risks, perhaps they impact some of your decisions made looking at operational risks, and you continue to refine this project. You continue to create solutions that are slightly different than where you were before as you create this convergence. Now, a lot of time people talk about three risks: market risk, operational risk, and technical risk. But you do this job long enough and you know there's a fourth one, and that fourth one is about the team. Does your team actually have the capabilities to deliver all these things that you've set out to do? Are you trying to bring new aspects to what a team does? Maybe some turnkey product that only works a certain way, that you have to make certain decisions that you wouldn't otherwise be making. And how does that then go back upstream to all the earlier decisions you've made? And so you keep working through this DNA definition process, this prototyping process, this fixing process until you get to your ready state, a new target project, this what you can consider to be the 2.0 state. Okay, so now I want to come back to the anchor concept here, which is the owner-led definition married to the partner-led delivery, which I'll just term as our define and deliver model. So we're going to wrap up now. I know I've been talking for about 35 minutes at least, but we have this path that allows us to start small, allows us to say, you know what, we aren't in a pre-delivery state. We aren't in a stable state. We actually are in a state that's a bit unstable because of the uniqueness. And that uniqueness starts with new customers or new outcomes that our customers need. And by creating your small room just based on how you start to explore that space, and you start to think about everyone who's going to end up in your big room, and as needed, you pull people into the small room and you start to define this new product. You start to define this new thing that's going to satisfy your business practices. And by focusing on creating MVPs, you're creating project definition that stacks on top of all the things that are standard and you already know. You get to this new point of readiness that's very similar to the readiness of your pre-delivery model, except it's more work and it's different work, right? But what it does is it lines up the level of predictability to deliver so that your team downstream does not find the definition problems that occur in nearly every project. And by doing that, you give a big benefit to the delivery team, but also by creating this small room, you're able to provide the second part of what the big room needs. It's not just removing the definition problems, is that items still come up and fast feedback and fast owner decisions are key. So having this small room with both the knowledge base in it, perhaps you trained AI to benefit you in some way to do so, and you can start to really leverage what you've created in that small room to work with the big room and have a virtuous cycle between the two as you go. All right. So that's been a lot. I'm gonna now try to bring it all back to uh, our original learning objective. So objective one was around this pillar that definition stages today are they're actually pre-delivery stages, and they, in cases of innovation, are misusing very, very valuable early time, where we have innovation in project delivery that's happening out in industry right now that's leading quickly to productization, that's moving from construction to manufacturing. And then you have the internal innovation, which is leading to uniqueness. And whether you're chasing productization or you're chasing uniqueness, owners more and more have to commit to earlier decisions they normally wouldn't want to be making early. And the requirements for that commitment make this definition stage and the work you do it so much more critical. And so it needs to have structure, which brings us to point two. And that structure helps identify just what needs to be decided early and then helps them to make those early decisions. And the beneficial byproduct of doing all this and collecting all this new knowledge is that you have this small room that both is defining the job, but then is also providing a knowledge base for fast structured feedback to the delivery team. Taking these conclusions and just trying to push folks to think about how to move forward. Um, Part of this webinar, as part of this process, is educating owners in what structured project definition is, when and how and why you use it. Further down the road, as more project definition work gets done in a similar manner, capable leaders of these small teams need to be trained. That training, I believe, starts with deep knowledge in delivery, whether that's construction or design or management of projects, and then an understanding, as I mentioned before, of how products are developed, of that creative process of starting with your customer and new outcomes, understanding your gaps, prototyping, and learning what it is that's going to make this project most successful. The nice thing is that once you've started to identify if you're chasing delivery innovation, if you're chasing innovation in your own products of the projects you deliver, you can start to set out tests. And tests can be small, but think very big, right? And ideally, the bigger the problem you're trying to solve, the better. Because if you can prove by starting small that you can really make a dent by setting up your vision, finding these uncertain critical problems, and then through prioritization, really tackle how to build a smart room that's going to solve these problems. If it's not bringing value, you opt out. As it's bringing value, this process and this approach helps you to scale. So you continue to go through your definition backlog, you continue to add expertise to your small room until you get to this point where actually you have the substance of a well thought out project that started with high levels of uniqueness. And if you want to know more and don't want to do this all by yourself, I am available. Contact information on the screen, and DuplexLoop, my company, we are taking new clients for next year. So I encourage you to reach out.